Hello and a warm welcome to this edition of the Philips African Dialogues. I'm Kukuletu Gele. As you can tell, we come to you today from the beautiful backdrop that we have that has been lit up by Philips. It's the clock tower here at the V&A waterfront in Cape Town. Now, this comes on the back of Philips launching its 6th edition of the Cape to Cairo Roadshow, where it's been highlighting innovations not only in lighting but also in healthcare. Now, we based here in the mother city to talk about how cities overall can move forward to becoming smarter cities by making use of reliable, efficient and environmentally sound energy solutions. I have a wonderful panel of esteemed guests who are going to help us tackle this particular topic by looking at what policymakers need to be aware of, what about finances also need to take care of and be alerted to, and more importantly, the level of innovation and technology across the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to my left Mr. Thierry Bonlanger. He's the Vice President and General Manager for Philips Lighting Africa. Towards his right is Brian Wilkinson, Chief Executive of the Green Building Council for South Africa, Derek Kutsia, Manager at Green Finance for Green Cape, and Colin Devenish. He's the Operations Executive for the V&A Waterfront. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Despite the chilly wind and the seagulls making some music, wonderful music in the air this evening, we are tackling a very exciting topic with regard to lighting, which all of you have a deepened interest in. I want us to start, Thierry, with you by getting a picture of what the current landscape when it comes to energy efficient use in the continent actually looks like.
Thank you, Gugu. I think when we talk about lighting, the first thing that comes to mind is really just a bulb in a socket. And we don't think twice about it until it doesn't work anymore, and we start realizing how important lighting is. So if we look at the continent, obviously we have a high rate of urbanization, and that in its own is creating a huge pressure in the cities, in the towns. We have a shortage of energy, and it's not just the creation of energy itself that's a shortage. We also have to transport that energy from where it's being created to the cities, to the towns. I don't think there's, with the exception of perhaps one or two countries, or at least cities throughout the African continent, where we don't have what we call load shedding. So it's a very common practice. And unless we come up with the proper solutions and try and alleviate that, it's actually going to carry on, and it's probably going to get worse.
So solutions is what we're looking for.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Brian, maybe if you can come in here and give us some perspective as to, with regard to those solutions that we're looking for when it comes to energy efficiency, who's doing it right? What does the landscape look like, and what progress has been made so far?
Green building in the South African way is this wonderful success story. And of course, energy efficiency is a huge part of environmental sustainability. Energy generation is one of the biggest emitters. So energy efficiency talks very directly to saving the planet. The private sector especially has really led this charge in terms of green buildings and therefore in terms of energy efficiency. So just a throwaway number, we hit 50 green building certifications in April last year, just coming up for 100 soon, so you can see the sort of growth. But we reviewed, after those first 50 certifications, we reviewed the impact that those 50 buildings had. The average green building is 34% more energy efficient than its benchmark building. So you sort of, as Terry was saying, we in South Africa, and in fact in the whole of Africa, suffer from an energy constraint. I know the guys at Eskom, if you'll forgive the pun, we're wired into the network at Eskom. At a 30% saving, the problem goes away. So the whole dialogue often is about the supply side, and we think about everything we hear on the news. Madupi's late, this is not happening, load shedding. It's a supply side conversation. I am loving as the conversation shifts to the demand side. And what can we do? Often we feel disempowered, but what can we do to actually help with the issue? And of course, energy efficiency is the big part.
Derek, to come to you, you're the guy who obviously monitors the financing with regard to this. Are we capitalizing on the opportunities both mentioned by Thierry and Brian with regard to energy efficiency?
Not at all, Gugu. I think there are lots of encouraging starts and signs, but I think there's so much more that can be done. I mean, I think just some comments from my side. I think the most efficient is off. So I think quite often one forgets that, before you start looking at all kinds of interesting technologies, is just to manage your consumption better. And there are lots of case studies of just people managing their behavior better, getting significant savings. And then you can get into solutions like lighting and HVAC and those types of things. So I think from a smart business management perspective, a lot can be done already, and I think Colin can probably talk to that some more. And then I think the other comment from my side is, we're not trying to put someone on the moon here. I think these technologies exist. They're constantly being improved on, but I think one can do a lot quite quickly and quite easily. There are barriers and they're real, but I think there's a real opportunity to grab energy efficiency and make a significant impact, as Brian mentioned.
Colin, let's come to you now to get your opening comments on your view on the landscape with regard to sustainable energy. And more importantly, we'll come to you for practical examples as to the progress that the VNA itself as the waterfront has done with regard to tapping into this innovation.
I think it's like Brian says, we can use the blame game and we can point fingers, but charity starts at home. So if we don't start looking and say, how can we make the difference, and everyone doesn't do that, how can we point fingers? So it's really looking and saying, how do we do it? We've also know that it has an impact on how we do our business. So if we don't have a look at where we're going to be in 3-5 years' time, then it's really our electricity costs, our water costs are going to run away with us. So we've got to see how we can become efficient now to future-proof our business. So we've got to do it. And we've seen that the payback periods are not that long. People tend to say you're going to take so long to pay it back. It's not the case. Also, the technology is there. Things have improved, compared to maybe 5-6 years ago. Technology is there, it is available, it is affordable. So why not do it? Because otherwise it's going to cost your business a lot more money.
Exactly.
I think it's because there is a commercial driver now.
Yes.
that people are looking at it. In the past it was a nice to have. Now there's a commercial driver, and that commercial driver is your bottom line.
Yeah.
You have to find a solution to reduce.
I think to a large extent we can, to a certain extent, say thank you to Eskom. Because, had we not been in the situation we are with the power, maybe people wouldn't have become so energy conscious and efficient as what we are becoming now. So yes, we were wasteful. If we look at ourselves and say, where were we 7 years ago to now? Why did we consume all that power 7 years ago when we didn't need to?
Yeah.
Yes, maybe the technology wasn't there, but it is there.
So Eskom's proving to be not so much of a turn-off then, quite clearly. But I want us to touch on this level of innovation. Is it taking place effectively and efficiently enough where Africans are sourcing African solutions to African problems? And more importantly, can we fall prey of having byproducts of innovative products which come out too late onto the African market, which actually aren't being used or consumed in more developed economies like in Europe?
Good example. Again, I think we need to look at where the energy is being manufactured. So you'd have a coal power station or you'd have a hydroelectric station. What's lacking in many countries is actually just the conduit of that power to the cities themselves or to where you're consuming it. So solar energy is becoming quite an efficient alternative. We're looking at street lighting, which is becoming very, very efficient. How is it becoming efficient? And these are really solutions that come born out of an African context. Let me give you some examples. We can put up street lights, we can let them burn all night. We could perhaps even go as far as to say, well, let's put motion detection on them so that the street lights actually dim when there's no movement. Why do you want a street light to burn when there's absolutely no movement? If you have, let's have an example, there's an accident at a particular intersection. You could actually increase the intensity of the light at that particular intersection when the emergency service comes through. So it's now driven by solar energy. But at the same time, we can start connecting these lights together and we can start managing them centrally. So we can start saying, well, there's movement there, there's no movement here, let's switch off. And it boils down to the panels, the batteries that are being used. All of that is now being reduced and becoming a lot more efficient. And really, these are solutions that are driven by the African context.
I want to come to you, Derek, here for a moment, because obviously there's a numbers game here. These ideas and ideologies need to be profitable, not only for the consumers who are making use of this electricity, but for those who will be investing there as well. From your perspective, is the funding taking place and is it finding its way through to these innovative solutions, which sound good on paper and are actually very practical?
Sure. And I think Colin alluded to it. the market has developed a lot over the past 5, 6, 7 years. And I think it's been driven by a number of things. Electricity prices have gone up in nominal terms by 400-500%. So I think, as Colin said, that in itself has made these investments much more attractive. Secondly, technology costs have come down significantly. As scale increases and more of these technologies get implemented, costs come down further. So the returns at the moment are extremely attractive. I think as a standalone investment case, they're probably some of the better investments that can be put in front of a CEO.
question.
I mean, you're looking at returns north of 30% in many instances. I think, so the numbers are there. I think there are significant barriers, though. I think you're spending money to save money. That's not always, you'd rather spend on expansion than on saving costs. I think that's an issue. I think quite often the guys who are pitching the solutions are engineers. They're talking a technical language. The CEO's got a financial mindset, and quite often these parties just talk past each other. So even though the returns are attractive, the barriers are real and significant. And there are many things that people are trying to get over them. There are incentives, there's the carrot and the stick, there are things like carbon taxes. So all these instruments are, again, making the investment case even more attractive. But as a standalone at the moment, yes, it's very attractive, but it's not happening nearly as frequently as it should if you look at the returns. But the financing is ready, the projects are there, and I think it's just a question of breaking down the barriers that exist to really get significant uptake.
Gugu, can I just add something? So yes, we spoke about the economics of energy efficiency. But it's one of these few areas, and green building, I suppose, is the umbrella, but it's one of these few areas where there's a simultaneous opportunity to do well by doing good. So, we understand, and anybody that doesn't understand climate change really does need to wake up. We understand where climate change is going, and we understand the role of corporates, we understand the role of governments in mitigating against climate change. So that's the do well piece. But then we have this almost unique opportunity to the do good piece. Then you have this unique opportunity to do well. So you can do good, and there's a solid business case.
Exactly.
Talking about paybacks, the office precinct where our offices are has 1.2 megawatts of solar on its roof. When that project was initiated, the payback period was 7 years. During construction, now you don't hear of things like this because of the way the cost of this technology is plummeting. During the project, the cost came down and that project was landed with a 4-year payback. Now, 4-year simple accounting payback is 25% plus per annum return. If Nedbank were to take out an advert today and say, we are offering a 25% return on your money, there would be a queue to the City Hall. But yet, all too often, property owners, property developers, property investors are looking, well, we need an incentive, we need something else. And of course, and that's craziness.
Exactly. But Colin, this is where you come in, because you're one of those property owners who have heeded the call, despite the lack of clarity with regard to incentives, and obviously the cost-cutting efficiencies have been highlighted. But why is it such a good thing for the V&A waterfront to be so energy efficient when they could follow the rest of the pack and ignore the doing good and being profitable issue at the same time?
Look, I think, it started for us about 7 years ago. When 2008, when the first round of load shedding started, I think there was a lot of media hype around lights, office blocks being on. And we were guilty at that point where you'd walk through our mall and the lights would burn 24 hours a day. And we then took a decision, we don't want to be on the front page of any newspaper. So you have energy savings, but you have the public relations aspect to it as well. So then we said, well, then we need to start making certain changes. And it's easy in some cases because you can just switch off. It's like at home, you've got a light switch. You can choose just to switch off lights or keep them burning. So, to start and say, let me just control the lights that I've got in place. They might be inefficient lights, but how do I control them? Once you start controlling, then you can say, how do I now have efficient lighting? And in some cases, it's maybe picking the low-hanging fruits first and developing that business case so that you can go to the funders, your shareholders, and say, this is what my returns are. Can I now get some more money to do some more work? So it's starting somewhere, developing that plan. And as we've gone along, because of the tariff increases, the low-hanging fruit next year you've got more low-hanging fruits because the tariff has increased. So you've actually got more to pick. So it's not as if you sort of, it's getting more difficult. Yes, it has. But, we have found that 7 years ago, we changed the lighting technology. 3 years thereafter, we were able to change all that lighting and still have a payback period of less than 3 years, and bring in new technology, which was now sort of available. So I think from a public relations point of view, it helps because your customers come in, they can see what you're doing. And then from a business point of view, really just the bottom line, the rands and cents. Just it works, and we can see where it's coming. I've used the example sometimes where the lighting technology, as it's changed, the old halogen lamp, which used to have 1,000 hours lamp life, LEDs now 40, 50,000 hours. Imagine the maintenance team that you've got, that you need to go and change these lamps every so often. It takes a lot of manpower to do that. So now you avoid that by just using better technology.
I want us to talk about that continuous change and obviously updating this innovative technology that comes into play. And Derek, maybe you can also come in here just to give us your perspective on the numbers. Does it all add up? Because the short-term technology changes quite quickly, Terry, and you can obviously give us insights with regard to the research and innovation and development in-house at Philips that's taking place with regard to continually developing and changing things to make it more energy efficient.
I think if we look at LED technology, obviously everyone talks about LED technology. It's a great technology. However, I think the experience that many consumers have had as a start on energy-saving technology that's come from the East, it's been a bad experience. So you're starting to see now the shift towards consumers saying, well, they want a brand that they understand, that they recognize, etc. That LED technology is now starting to take hold in the market. I'll give you an idea. The old incandescent lamps were efficient probably by 1%. The rest was actually heat. Now, if you start looking at the heat generation in a building, Colin will probably be the first one to tell you that he's got to increase his air conditioning. So it's now starting to play a game where if you don't change your lighting, you have to increase your air conditioning. Colin's also going to probably tell you, as an owner or as running a retail office park, the generator that he's running is probably massive. If he has efficient technology, there's also a saving there, which he hasn't mentioned. So all of these points actually start adding up. But LED technology certainly is something which is coming to the fore. If we start looking at football stadiums, even with camera technology, you don't want to have that flickering. And that's where LED plays a big part as well. And again, I think a point which was very valid as well is the replacement of that technology. You're talking about 40, 50,000 hours. It has a direct impact on your bottom line in terms of maintenance, in terms of moving that or changing those bulbs after 50,000 hours. So it has a huge impact, both direct and indirect as well.
Brian and Derek, I want to get your voices in here because obviously you need to substantiate why this would be a good cause from a financial perspective. But I'm worried if we find ourselves in a position where the technology changes so quickly that some of the clients that you speak to might be concerned about why invest in this now when 2 years later I might need to, add in additional capital just to update the system.
You don't wait. That's like saying I'm not going to buy a PC because next month the new Apple's coming out. So you jump on board, and Colin, I'm sure, will refer to this. You choose your moments of intervention quite carefully. So the really clever property investors, the really clever property managers will initially install the right stuff if they have the opportunity. If it's an existing building, they'll wait until end of life and use that as the opportunity to switch across. And with payback periods of 2-3 years, who cares if the technology changes in 4 years? You've paid for it, and you move on to the next.
Perhaps to add on what Colin is saying, in many countries throughout the rest of Africa, we're finding that the technology is being left. So you have incandescent technology, you have CF lighting, or compact fluorescent, and now you're moving into LED. And you see a lot of customers actually skipping the CF and going straight to LED because LED is now becoming very affordable as well.
Derek, I just want to get your insights on that. You were nodding quite intensely a moment ago with regard to the investment. Invest now rather than later because either way you're going to be penny wise and pound foolish?
Absolutely, and I think as Brian mentioned, I think property owners or business owners are sophisticated. I think it's people who can make financial decisions, and typically, what we would see when you sit in front of a corporate, there might be 10 interventions open to them, and they might pick the first 3 because they make the most sense now. They might wait with intervention 4 or 5 until either tariffs go up or technology costs come down. But waiting is just going to cost you much more, and that's also an easy sum to do. I mean, you can quite easily see what you are going to pay without doing anything, and what the cost will be, say, by replacing your lights. And quite often the business case is so obvious that it just jumps out at you. It's much better to do it than to wait. But I think it's you do it on a case-by-case basis, and you look at each technology and you make a decision per property, per technology. And quite often the answer is get going. Maybe not do everything, but certainly do quite a lot. As early as possible.
I think what's coming out clearly is it's a journey you're on. It's not, and it's a journey where you're never going to reach your destination because technology will improve. You're going to look at things differently. So as long as you start the journey, then it's going to sort of improve. But it's also looking, and in some cases, it's looking at there is a timing issue. For example, we made a decision a couple of years ago that we would wait on solar technology and rather make our base system more efficient. Otherwise, we're putting solar on an inefficient system. Also, if you look at solar now, it's most probably half the price that it was 4 or 5 years ago. So in some cases, yes, one needs to look at the market and say, maybe wait. But in some cases, you can maybe say, let me do a trial period and do a little bit of a mock-up and a sample and a pilot project and get to know things through that. So you're cutting your teeth, you're getting to know and getting the experience, and then say, now that I've done my pilot, now I can do a lot bigger project. So there's different ways of doing it. But in some cases, yes, maybe you need to wait. Other cases, at least try it and get the experience. And once you've got it, then it just becomes a lot easier to do more.
I want to bring Brian in here as well to find out if we are talking to the right sectors which consume this amount of electricity. From what I understand, 3/4 of electricity demand actually comes from commercial property users and industrials versus your average South African household or African household. Are the right industries, and I say industrial sectors because we know the current crisis in South Africa. No power, it impacts on mining and manufacturing, less confidence, less economic growth, and then we all get nervous about foreign direct investment in South Africa. Does there need to be a mindset change where individuals like Colin maybe can instill some kind of confidence and give guidance to other sectors which haven't yet heeded the call to organizations like yours?
Yeah. So Gugu, I always say that this is actually a good story. I'm so glad that Colin used the analogy to a journey. Because green building and energy efficiency is not an event. It's a process. The Green Building Council of South Africa started its journey focusing on the commercial property sector, so organizations like the V&A. And our experience has been a great one. The vast majority of the commercial property sector has actually been incredibly responsive. They're all doing in some way, shape or form. Some are leading, absolutely, but in some way, shape or form, whether it's predicated on a responsible investment sort of premise, or whether it's predicated on how we're going to save some money and trying to immunize themselves against huge sort of electricity price increases. We took a decision last year together with the IFC, part of the World Bank, that we're now going to cross over and join with the residential sector and see how we can bring homeowners into the green building journey as well, and through green building, obviously, into energy efficiency. And one of the most interesting perspectives we gained in sort of doing the market analysis on whether we wanted to get into residential was the banks being incredibly interested, not from the point of view of energy efficiency, not from the point of view of environmental sustainability, from the very simple point of view of if a homeowner saves money on their utility costs, they are more likely to pay their bond installment. Therefore, they're a better risk. Therefore, the bank's really, really interested in whether you have an energy efficient home. So it's incredibly interesting how we arrive at the right destination, but from a different starting point.
You educating sectors, government leaders, as well as obviously chief executives of large corporates. I want to get back to that consumer, that man on the street who has no idea or concept as to how much electricity that light bulb actually consumes. That education, Terry, who does it lie with?
It absolutely lies with us. So I think we can talk about energy saving, But I think there's a lot more to it than just energy saving. I mean, we know that lighting has an effect on a student's capability of learning. We know that lighting has, I mean, obviously you can create different moods in your house just through lighting. So lighting has a much bigger influence in your life than just switching on a light as such. But it certainly does. And I'll be the first one to admit, when you go to a retail store and it says if you buy this, it's equivalent to X amount of lights and it uses 30 watts as opposed to 65. And it is a confusing message. You're absolutely right in that. And that is our onus to actually change. For me, it's very simple. You go into a shop, you ask, what is the output? In other words, what do I consume? How many watts? And how much or how many lumens do I get out? And that's a simple way of actually looking at it. And in my opinion as well, go with LED lighting. Don't go with anything else. You're starting to see LED lighting becoming very, very affordable. Again, it is our responsibility to do that. How do we do it? We do it through a lot of education in the consumer stores, in the retail stores itself, bringing the customer in and educating. If you buy an old light, 2 LEDs or 5 or 6 LEDs are equivalent to this one in terms of consumption. That's the way we've got to do it. We've got to carry on doing it.
Just to sidestep briefly, Colin, you can add something in, but I want to ask you a daring question, if this is enough, because we see the protests that take place in places like Orlando West and Soweto, where people are fighting against paying high electricity tariffs, but it goes back to the usage. If the education's there, then the approach will be different.
I think we're also seeing, you're absolutely right, Gugu, but we're seeing a big difference in attitudes between owners of homes that actually own their home versus renters. So you're seeing a person that actually owns their house that has a responsibility of paying for that particular electricity bill versus electricity being just included in the rent. And if I was renting a house, I mean, the attitude that I would have up to a certain point is to say, well, why am I going to invest in changing someone's infrastructure because it doesn't belong to me? So that's the kind of education that we need to look at. So now we're starting to say, well, let's measure the usage, even if you're a renter. And that's where it's causing a little bit of controversy, because now I'm actually being measured on what I use as opposed to a free-for-all. But I think it's a good thing, it's a good step, but again, it's an education that we have to go through. You know, if we look at lighting, lighting is not the biggest consumer of your electricity. It accounts for about 30 to 40%, or it can account to up to 30 to 40% of your electricity bill. But if you start converting all the other stuff, your stoves, your solar geysers, etc., or geysers to solar energy, that makes a huge impact as well. But again, as Colin said, it's a journey. You have to go and make that investment to see the benefits in the longer term. And that's when you, as a homeowner, it makes sense.
Colin, you wanted to come in
I
there?
think just to add on what Terry's saying is, I don't think the responsibility sits solely with the suppliers. I think each individual should take the responsibility on themselves and try and educate them, because you're the one paying the bill at the end of the month. But I suppose also corporates like ourselves, where we've got the technical staff in-house. So we're developing that knowledge. So how can we pass that knowledge on to our staff? If we just pass it on to our staff, we're having an impact on 220 people. And they will knock on to their people as well. If we can have school groups that come around and look at what we do in terms of our sustainability program and different courses, then you're having an impact. So I think as large corporates, we have that responsibility. Even if we start educating our own staff, if every corporate does that, imagine the impact that we can have. Because the big problem is people don't know where. They walk in and they say, okay, I'm getting all this knowledge, but this is the price and this is what I'm getting. Where if we can just give them that and then help them on the journey, it just becomes a lot more easier for them to take that step. So I think the ownership sits on everybody.
And sorry, I
Go ahead.
shouldn't make it humorous, but of course an electricity price that's going to spiral is going to make that job a hell of a lot easier.
On that note, let's go to a quick ad break. We're coming to you from Cape Town, the V&A waterfront, the beautiful backdrop of the clock tower, which has been lit up by Philips. We'll continue this conversation right after this. welcome back to this Philips African Dialogues discussion where we're taking a look at sustainable energy power for smarter cities. Brian, you threw a plug in there that once not necessarily demise, but the challenges that Eskom are facing obviously present a nice niche opportunity for the private sector when it comes to promoting energy efficiency in the household. But I want to pick your brain on the collaborative effort, especially when it comes to the public sector. Are they pulling their weight in leading this challenge that we're trying to spearhead with regard to energy efficiency in smarter cities in South Africa, Brian?
You know, it's a question that's often asked, and I think we always look for some sort of easy solution, some sort of silver bullet. And always the easiest one is, well, governments must legislate, and there must be incentive programs, and there must be this, and there must be that. The good news, I think, in the South African context, especially in respect to green building, is the public sector absolutely on board. We've got some good legislation. SANS 10400XA is an energy efficiency code that is built into building regulations. It's leading edge stuff. Globally, it's actually not bad at all. Many of the public sector buildings have already gone green. The greenest building in South Africa in 2013 was the Department of Environmental Affairs' new head office.
That's a good example.
So, and of course they had to do it, but a wonderful example of them stepping up and saying, well, it can happen. And there are many other examples of how the public sector have come on board. Some of our provinces have some leading sort of energy efficiency and green building initiatives that are doing good stuff. So I'm not unhappy with the role that the public sector is playing. I'm very excited about the role that the private sector is playing. I always think that, if legislation sort of precedes an industry move, then you get pushback. But where legislation keeps up with and does not sort of present unrealistic targets and unrealistic expectations, then it's going to happen. So in respect of energy efficiency and green building, if legislation were passed right now, many people in corporate South Africa would be saying, long overdue, we're already there, we can make this work. Rather than if it had happened perhaps 10 years ago, then it would have been game on, is how can we get round it, how can we do something different. So you use the word collaborative. I actually think it's actually working quite nicely together. So no one sector is necessarily leading. I think the private sector have been exceptional in the way they've stepped up. And, precincts like the one we're in. But then the public sector's also done quite a lot of good stuff.
Derek, you agree
I'd
here?
like to go in there, and I agree with Brian completely on the stick side of it. I think on the carrot side, clearly, the more attractive these investments are, the more uptake you'll get. I think the City of Cape Town with their feed-in tariff on the renewable side, I think that again just pushed a few projects over the edge in terms of bankability. So I think that's an attractive thing. Incentives to sweeten these things, I think, certainly add. And then I think there is a role, like Brian said, for province and for city to lead by example. I think the Western Cape government specifically are very passionate about leading by example. Jenny Cargill and the team are doing fantastic work. We were involved with them in a 2-day energy game changer workshop where they looked at a number of things that they can do to lead by example, to really improve the energy situation, not only in the Western Cape, but in nationally. So I think the City of Cape Town have done a number of things. They've retrofitted quite a number of street lights and traffic lights. So there's a lot going on. And I think, as Brian said, it's more on the positive side. It's lead by example. It's create an environment that encourages people to do it, not force them to do it. And I think a lot is happening.
Yeah, I think the City of Cape Town, for example, also runs an energy efficiency forum where once a quarter they organise it, gets together with the private sector, and there's different presentations in terms of case studies that people have done and how they've done it. So yeah, I think there is a good collaboration, and it might be different in different areas of the country, but I think overall there is the effort to try and make things work and see how can we actually get out of the problem that we're in at the moment.
I hear from your colleagues on the panel that the government is certainly doing enough to kind of cooperate with the private sector. But what about protecting our local environment from threats from developed economies who are ahead of the scale here?
So it's a very good point. We're seeing certain technologies in lighting being banned in Europe, and a good case is recently they've banned in the Eurozone the halogen type of technologies. We know that we need to protect ourselves because we're going to get a lot of these technologies being dumped into some countries throughout Africa, and they're not energy efficient. But I want to add a little bit to what was said earlier on as well with regards to what we're doing as city councils, etc. We need to keep in mind that there's certain people or certain populations that cannot afford necessarily the latest and greatest technologies. And it's really based on disposable income. If you're going to go to a shop, you're going to buy what you can afford, as opposed to the energy that it consumes. So there is an education that has to happen there. This is where government is really assisting, where they're saying, let's ban this technology because it is the most inefficient. But it is up to us as the vendors to bring technology that is affordable. And we're starting to see how quickly LED technology is coming down and starting to replace what the old filament or what we call GLS technology used to be.
Brian, I want to bring you in there quickly for a moment because obviously these elements can get banned, but the clients need to agree and cooperate and also deal with the vendors who are providing this this particular service.
Yeah, you know, it's so I think we suffer so much from this sort of short-termism where it becomes about, you know, the cost of replacing a light bulb now, and we forget that an incandescent light bulb maybe has 1,000 hours, an LED light bulb is 50,000 hours, so it's going to last 50 times longer. It may be 3 or 4 times more expensive, but, you know, simple mathematics is, or simple arithmetic, that's not even maths. Simple arithmetic says absolutely the LED is the right one to go for. But because we so often have this incredibly short-term measurement framework or mindset, we end up doing the wrong thing. You know, to come back to, can governments play a role? These crazy energy-sucking devices do need to just make their way off the shelves. The one good thing, I suppose, because of the real short-term life of, for example, an incandescent light, it's not going to take long for them to disappear. But it's probably the one area where more could be done. I loved the program. You know, we chatted during the break about some of the work that Eskom had done, and a few years ago Eskom had light bulb replacement programs. They were incredibly successful programs, and if there is an opportunity to, I think, for the public sector to step in, maybe it's to revive those, especially into the socio-economic environments that perhaps have less affordability.
Colin, maybe you can also share your sentiments here, obviously representing the private sector, your liaisons and your interactions with government. Are they making it easy? Because you've also been competing on a global platform where the VNA has won several awards for the energy efficiencies that it does have and competing against great cities from across the globe.
Yeah, I think, yes, for us, we want to play on the global market. And yes, last year we were very, I wouldn't say fortunate, because I think there's a lot of hard work has gone into it, where we were sort of voted best city worldwide in terms of responsible tourism. So it does say we're playing on the world market, and we're able to compete internationally. And I think sometimes we underestimate the capabilities and skills that we have locally, and that we are capable of doing and undertaking various sizes of projects. But I think working with the city and working with government, yes, it's. I think in some cases it has become easier. We can have the discussions before we actually even start the projects and work with them and say, okay, this is where we're going, and they can say, okay, well, maybe you need to go try this a little bit, and this is where, you know, the bylaw says this, so can you try this? So I think instead of maybe just leaving the project, I think instead of saying it should come from government, what are we as private sector doing to interact with government as well? Because yes, it's not about submitting our project and saying, how can we get this approved by council? It's about actually maybe talking people and letting them understand what we're trying to do, and vice versa. And then, you know, in some cases they can actually, what we're doing can help to change future bylaws as well, in terms of how we work together. So, no, I think it is working, but it's got to work both ways. It's a partnership. And as much as what we expect certain things to come from government, we've also got to be proactive in terms of our approach to government.
You mentioned partnership there, and I want to pick your brain on public-private partnerships. Are they taking place, and are they enough, and do they actually work in such an environment?
many cases, if I can just give some examples of examples outside of South Africa, where we've actually created private-public partnerships with certain city councils. A good example is Dakar in Senegal, where we're actually doing a PPP to make sure that we have the correct street lighting, and as well as exactly what's been done here, to make sure that we have the proper funding mechanism behind it. So it's being done in many cities at the moment.
Seeing as collaboration is still the key theme of this discussion, you mentioned something earlier during the break, Terry, that it's about capturing the socket. It's not just about the LED globes, and I want to bring the financier here because he'll obviously give us more perspective on the bankability of these projects. It's not just about investing in that particular globe, but the other additional sources which could work as a support structure, like solar or alternative sources of energy overall. From your perspective, Derek, are we doing enough to tap into that market, and what is the potential like?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the big challenges that financiers often face is the size of the project. So it's very difficult to invest the time and the effort to finance the retrofitting of 50 light bulbs. I mean, it might be a 5,000 Rand project. So I think taking a holistic approach, looking at the portfolio, if there's a portfolio of properties, and then looking at all the technologies within that portfolio certainly adds to the bankability. It just brings the transaction cost down from a financing perspective. So I think that has been one of the barriers in terms of getting real large-scale financing deployed. It's just the size of the project. So certainly looking at more than just the light bulb for a start, I think is attractive. I think from a financier's point of view as well, is the technology is almost irrelevant to them. They're not engineers. They don't want to understand the LED technology and how it will last. So they want to look at the bigger picture in terms of what this will do to the total energy consumption, what will the cash flows be that will come out of it, what security can be provided. And I think, again, that's another challenge. You know, financiers like to provide financing against security. Now, you're not going to go and unscrew 1,000 light bulbs if you're not getting paid. So again, I think all these things have a part to play in terms of making these projects more bankable. And a lot is happening, but it is still challenging.
Terry, maybe this is where you can come in, because as you mentioned, it's not just about that light bulb, and it's also about understanding the financier's perspective by capitalizing on the other additional elements that you can add into this particular investment case. Maybe if you can allude to some of the projects that you've been thinking about with regard to this kind of business.
Google, as a company, we're very fortunate to probably be one of the only companies that actually owns or has access to people's homes, that has access to retail parks, that has access to the streets. And we look at light and owning that socket not just as being a light source, but also if we take the context of street lighting, you've actually got a pole and you've got a light source at the end of it. Now, why don't we expand on that technology? And we're speaking as well right now to a lot of telcos to include the Wi-Fi environment in the street, because you have that infrastructure already. If we look at home environments, because I own the light socket or the socket itself, I can start doing analytics. If it was, for example, an office park, where I could actually say to the landlord, I'm not using this area after a week of analyzing the analytics. And it starts becoming a lot more efficient because I'm owning the light source. If we think of home environments, again, because I have access to that light socket, insurance companies would like to hear that I also have fire detection or smoke detection built into it as well. So I'm starting to involve the insurance companies as well. And it's got a much bigger impact in terms of owning that light socket than just giving light. So there's a lot more technology that's happening. But we're starting to also talk about connecting all our lights together. So imagine just from a consumer perspective, coming home and taking out your smartphone and being able to connect or to control your lights in your house with your smartphone. So it's connectivity. Every single light has an IP address which allows you to manage it, and you can start putting software in. Imagine in a city environment where I can start managing the street lights from a central location. So it's very, very exciting what's happening down the road.
Brian, maybe you can come in to give us more perspective. I understand that there is a link with sustainability on this front and making South African cities and African cities overall globally competitive when it comes to this particular benchmark.
So we're very sort of proud of our role as South Africa in the whole sort of green building movement and environmental sustainability in the built environment. There are 100 of us around the world. It's called the World Green Building Council. We were the 13th member. We chair the World Green Building Council, a previous chairman of ours, is now the chairman of the World Green Building Council, and we really have been quite a sort of a leading player, especially in the developing country context. So we were the first country to launch a socioeconomic indicator as part of our green building rating system. Because, it's not only about energy, it's not only about water efficiency, it has to be about the context in which you operate. So things like, has a building project promoted equity? Things like, has a building project leveraged the opportunity to transfer knowledge and skills and so forth?
We're about to wrap up the conversation, but I think it's obviously necessary for us to reflect on some of the positive examples that have worked and maybe even those that have failed that we can learn from before charting the path forward as to what energy efficiency can mean for cities overall. Conan, I'd like to come to you. Obviously, you've dipped your finger in that litmus test several times. Some solutions have worked, some haven't, but I want you to walk us through some practical examples with regard to some of your tenants that you have here at the V&A waterfront who have benefited from these energy efficient solutions and some mistakes that you might have made along the way that you've actually learned from.
I think a big learning curve is, and I always say meter and meter and meter some more, because you cannot manage what you don't measure. And then also to make the responsibility for each tenant and user for what they consume. So for example, every single tenant needs to have a meter, and so that the moment you start paying for what you use, your behavior changes. If it's a meter, for example, that's on an entire floor of an office block and you're allocating it per square meter, why must my behavior change because I'm being treated as everyone else? So I think something that we learned up front was you got a meter and you got to get that data, because that also proves your track record down the line. Because how can you go and ask for more finance? How can you educate people if you haven't got the data to do it with? And it has helped us to have discussions with various tenants. It's also helped us to improve our tenant criteria document as we go forward, because now when tenants move in, we specify certain power requirements. So we done a case study on jewelers, and tenants at jewelers that changed their power. So we had some cases where jewelers were consuming as much as 90 kilowatt hours per square meter. They write down to 30 kilowatt hours per square meter without having a negative impact on their sales. And then we've also had cases where the jewelers, the store temperature has reduced. And obviously, as we discussed earlier, that has a knock-on impact on the air conditioning. But also the indirect impact is staff satisfaction for that jeweler, meaning that my store's a lot cooler, it's a lot more comfortable, so my productivity of the staff goes up. So I think the one learning was, let's, if I can call it, get the T-shirt, learn, and then try and use what we've learned and transfer that knowledge. Because then other people don't need to go through that learnings that we've made. Also, we can't expect our tenants and our staff to behave in a certain manner if we're not behaving in that manner. So we've got to set their example. I think also a sort of learning was making that public statement about what we do. Because the moment you make that public statement, there is no turning around. You can't say, well, I'm now going to change what I do, because the public watch what you do. Whether it's via Twitter, Facebook, people will say, but you've said this, why aren't you behaving accordingly? There was a good example where we put up little messages on our bathrooms in terms of water we've saved. We had a customer phoning to say, but why is your lights burning outside? And we said, yes, because we're busy with the maintenance program. So it shows you how observant people are in terms of what you do. And I think one of the big things that maybe we could have started earlier was education, and improve our education to our staff, our tenants, and then we could have been a lot further than where we are at the moment. So in terms of maybe the way forward is a lot more focus in terms of how do we now educate people and make sure that they're on the journey with us, and maybe even a step further, because then they'll come back and drive us to take it to another level.
You mentioned something interesting with regard to learning.
Yes.
Wearing that T-shirt and sharing some of the tips and ideas with regard to the pitfalls and some of the successes that you've achieved. Now that you have competed on a global landscape, and Brian, you can also come in here to give us more insights, are you exchanging ideas with international peers from more developed economies who, as Thierry alluded to earlier, we can leapfrog some of the challenges and innovations that come through?
I think in some cases, yes, we've been to waterfront workshops where different waterfronts have been discussed around the world. We've also traveled to different waterfronts to see what they're doing and share that knowledge. In terms of probably more developing economies into Africa, maybe we need to do more on that side and see how we can compete. But we have done in terms of recently there was the World Travel Market Africa in terms of responsible tourism, which was held in Cape Town, and for basically the African continent, how could we share that knowledge in terms of different themes and presentations. So we do that, but I suppose we could increase.
Terry, you get to observe all what takes place in all 54 states with the emergence of mobile money and how that's also having an impact on energy efficiency in markets like Kenya. South Africans also learning from this, members of the rest of the continent as well?
Absolutely, and I come back to the point that we have to look at the affordability side as well. We have some programs in East Africa where the rural population actually don't buy their lights, and they're solar-based lights, but they use M-Pesa, which we all know is cell phone technology, payment through cell phone technology. So it's a pay-as-you-go system. And these are, again, solutions which are really designed for Africa, by Africans. But just listening to my co-presenters here, I think there's one driver, and unfortunately, and I'm saying this with the greatest respect, but unfortunately, it's a commercial driver, whether we like it or not. At the end of the day, I think if we didn't have the pressure on the grid that we have throughout not only South Africa but Africa, we probably wouldn't have moved as quickly as we have in the technologies that we're implementing in the buildings today.
Derek, you can bring your voice in on this one as well. Are those commercial drivers also changing and evolving as quickly as the technology is to tap into the different markets that they can actually make a return from?
Absolutely. I think this is not a new problem. Like I say, it's not something that's unique to South Africa, as Terry rightly says. So I think very clever minds have been grappling with this, and very innovative solutions have been developed. And there are a lot of international donors like GIZ or the Carbon Trust that are bringing the international best practices to South Africa, and they've been active in the market for quite a while. And I think the market the industry has now developed quite quickly, and it's now getting to the stage of, it's not just theoretical anymore. These, like the waterfront, it stands, you can point to it, and you can go and tell people about it. And I really think we are through the J curve, and that we'll see rapid uptake over the next couple of years.
I want to pick your brain on the biggest lessons learned from that experience of the J curve, where financiers were obviously investing in either the wrong technologies or the money wasn't necessarily coming in, being back strongly enough. Top of mind?
Top of mind for me really is that the business case is just much more attractive than it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. The numbers are just there, more than they were. And like I said earlier, whether it's because of electricity prices doing that, technology prices doing that, the numbers are more attractive. The business case is just more attractive. Apart from the fact they're more comfortable with it, but for me that's the number one reason. It's just a more attractive investment.
And of course the business case will continue to become more attractive.
That's what I want us to get into.
We're staring a 25% increase in electricity prices in the face. We're staring probably another few years of 20% plus. So the business case is just going to get a whole lot better.
I want us to tap in that in your closing comments. And Colin, let's start off with you. The future of energy efficient cities in Africa and across the globe. How do we get there, and what will it take?
Yeah, I think it's no longer about energy efficiency. It's about how do we take that next step. So if you've been working on an energy efficiency solution, how do you look at alternate energy? That price is coming down. So how do we now move from energy sort of efficient to energy independence almost, where you can say, I've got all my roof space, I've got all the space around in terms of wind. So what can I do to really go and sort of look at alternate forms of energy, and then build on that. So I think for me, it's around, if you've done everything, how do you go? Because yes, it is quite a big jump, is to go to alternate energy sources. So how do we do that? So I think that's the way forward for us. And then to make sure that everyone that you've got in your team is on board and going with you, because that's the impact that you can have, and it's almost that domino effect where you can, if you have impact on one staff member,
The
how
rest
it goes
follow.
and things like that. It's just, yeah.
Derek, I take it you agree. Your closing sentiments on the
Yeah.
future of sustainable energy
I
consumption?
definitely agree. For me, the case studies exist. So for me, it's really a case of going out there and awareness raising, telling people what's working, and just educating people who haven't done it yet that it's a great business case and you can point to examples. So for me, it's about awareness creation and case study sharing or best practice sharing.
Yeah, technically, perhaps it's about smart cities and smart grids, which is on the supply side. And I think where we all can play a role, where we need to empower ourselves, was another crazy pun, but empower ourselves a whole lot more, is on the demand side. A project we were involved in, a household reduced its energy consumption by 29% through pure behavior change. No interventions at all in terms of fancy technology, just being aware of how energy is used. Near as damn at a 30% saving. So demand side management, absolutely the space to be. And then on the supply side, and the cities that will move in this direction, smart grids and smart cities.
Terry, to close off with you, to borrow from some of Brian's words, how do we empower ourselves in order to enlighten those who are looking towards this road of energy efficiency?
Good, simple. In my opinion, it's public-private partnerships. You have to make it affordable. You have to make it as affordable as possible for a lot of people to take it up. On the one hand, you have government that is saying, is it cheaper for me to manufacture or to build another power station, or is it cheaper for me to save electricity? And it's clear that it's cheaper to save, and it's quicker to get there to save electricity. So PPPs are the way to go. In my opinion, if you can get the affordability, and we've spoken about the finance side, affordability for me is the most critical aspect to make a success of this.
A big, big thank you to my panelists for sharing their insights with us over the last hour. Mr. Terry Boulanger, he's the Vice President and General Manager for Philips Lighting Africa. Brian Wilkinson, Chief Executive of Green Building Council South Africa. Derek Kutsian, Manager from the Green Finance for Cape organization, and Colin Devonish, Operations Executive for the VNA Waterfront. Well, that's where we leave it for this edition of the Philips Africa Dialogues. We have been coming to you from the VNA Waterfront with the backdrop of the clock tower, which has been lit up by Philips. Energy efficiency is the way to go, and we'd also like to give a big thank you to the Cape Town Fish Market for playing host to us this evening. I'm Kukuletu Tele for CNBC Africa.